at least as yet. All right, so as I was preparing, I thought this might be useful. So you're all writing a literature review. So I was looking for some sources. So like this is from Sage Publishing, as a well-known publisher of peer-reviewed journal papers. So like they have a checklist for writing a literature review. That's what you're doing for your next assignment, unless you're finished already. You should have, if possible, read other reviews in preparation for writing a review, or at least what is called perusing them, as in glance at them at the very minimum. All studies, you should have one or more variables that is in your study, right? Meaning everybody should know what exactly you're studying, because the variables on the study is what you're going to be writing was literature review. For each of those variables, there's going to be some keyword that has synonyms or alternative terms. If you're coming in, do you have a question? Why are you coming in unmuted? I don't know what that is. I guess let's move back to this. So you should have found citations, read their abstracts, figured out which ones are irrelevant to your topic and basically throw those away. Figured out which of these are worth digging deeper. Should you read the whole paper? Should you find similar articles? You can find that by using the keywords or by looking at the references in the papers that are relevant to your study. You should find a way to like log that either in a Google Docs or a Word document, or in a, there are other tools that you can use to keep track of your literature. And then you can read and make notes. So we did for the literature matrix assignment, you were supposed to annotate one. You could actually do it for all the articles you're going to read. But either way, you're going to have to figure out which ones you're going to actually use in your paper. And some point along the way, you should have a potential outline. So I just went with a group that they didn't have an outline. I'm suggesting that that should be early on in your process. You should write the paper with a purpose. The literature should back up your argument, unless nothing can be found on what you're saying. The tone should be academic, not casual. You should look for feedback within the group as well as from the teacher if possible. And generally, a good literature review, you're going to have more than one draft. Like I said here, maybe several times. And then here's a more complicated one, which you certainly can read at your leisure. So I could put this in the chat if you want to read it, because this is sort of beyond where you are with the class, but they're telling you how to approach literature review. So they tell you what a literature review is, and this is all the way up to a PhD. So this is sort of like beyond where we're in the class. So they say what a literature review is, and they say it's related to the research question and to the discussion, and why is it in a thesis, and they give it some justification, and they talk about what is called a critical writing, which is what you're really trying to do. So you're supposed to define your main topic. This is the sections and subsections. Figure out the keywords related to these sections and subsections, and then you need to select literature you're going to review. And then you're going to have documents. By the way, those documents can be in more than one section. So for example, a systematic review could be more than one section. A particular study could be more than one section of a thing. So it's not like one paper is necessarily only for one section of a document. Sometimes it is, but it's not just, oh, these people are writing on these papers and these other people in your same thing. You have to figure it out based on the topics and subtopics. And then according to this particular approach of literature review, you need to define the main topic, you need to search the literature, you need to analyze the results, as in, when I mean analyze the results, being analyze what you've read. Then you need to write, reflect on your writing to see if what you've written makes sense. And then they have a checklist of 12 things. This is really at an A+ level. So they talk about, this is, I think, for everybody should be doing this. So all of you should have coverage. So whatever the focus of your project, you should cover enough literature that you show the tutor or anybody reading a paper that you have a fair understanding of the area. Synthesis is kind of like getting to an A+, where What is supposed to be everybody doing, at least at a B, is you're reading a number of papers. You're not only paraphrasing them. What you write will end up being the group's perspective on the topic, which is beyond just an analysis. It is like, here is our perspective on this area. Uh, so since this is kind of complicated, so there are many things that could be considered, then the method would be important. Essentially, all of you, the method is essentially going to find papers that are important and read them. It's good, if possible, to find theories in the field that you're going to be relating to your research method, so you can write about that in your literature review. You want to talk about why the particular research problem is important, both in terms of theoretical significance and practical significance. It should be well organized and coherent. That's the rhetoric. And those are some of the things to consider. In case you guys have interest in this, do you have interest? I could put this in the chat. I just did that as a, instead of wasting time at the beginning of class, I said, let me just start on time. We still only have 20 people. Wow. So let me put, where's the chat? Oh, here's the chat. I'll put this in the chat in case anybody is interested. That's that particular paper. I admit people still coming. Any questions so far, guys? I mean, I did that really fast. My whole point is there anybody has a pressing question on the literature review? Or not at this time? So I was just showing you that there are checklists for writing a literature review. Literature review is a challenging task. No questions or concerns that you want to raise at this point? All right, so I'm going to go from that to the ethics. This is not the lecture, I'm still going to the next thing. So the next assignment after the literature review is the ethics form. So the ethics form, in the past, like about 2 years ago, the next assignment after literature review would have been the chapter 3 methods. Instead of that, what we're doing now is doing the ethics application form. I'm not sharing the screen. Let me share the screen. It's up, but you're not seeing it. There we go. So this is the ethics form, and it's actually been revised. So this is actually a real UTech ethics form. So when you're doing major project, you're going to be using this. So you're going to be putting in the 150 characters that describe the short title of your project, which you get that from your concept paper. The principal supervisor is the person who is the major project supervisor, or I guess in this case, maybe it would be a tutor. And then these are for postgraduates, and then there's a section for undergraduate. But you know, this doesn't look like the new form. I'm thinking it says new form, but I think the new form looks different. Anyway, I'm just going through what I see here. So there's a section for the date. Just so that you all know, the date of the project is to do it when the data collection starts. As it says, you anticipate contact with participants. It's not when you start the literature review or whatever, it's when you start to interact with participants and records and anything else. And then they ask another question like, is there funding? Is there privacy legislation? Most of those are normally not applicable, but every project has an aim and a significance. So research questions can all be rewritten in forms of aims and the significance. We already have a section of that for the assignment, the first assignment. So you would just basically put this, as in the purpose is the same as the aim. So if you already had a good aim, you just be filling that out. And typically, most of this is no. You'd actually have to look for your project if these are no or not, because it could be that you're having people under 18 and then you have to check yes. And it could be that you are doing, I'm not sure which of these you typically be doing. If you're actually doing people highly dependent on medical care, it would have to go to what is called the UTech General Committee. And you would have to look at carefully if this is going to be something that is not going to be a problem. So generally speaking, you can do research on people who are ill without being people actually in, highly dependent. This is emergency care, intensive care, neonatal. This is babies, people terminally ill or unconscious. People with intellectual or mental impairment, these are things that are not going to be simple to say yes. It's easy to say give permission. If they're going to be manners, you want to say how will the informed consent of those children be obtained? That's typically through a parent and guardian, right? And then this is the part which we're not going to talk about today. I'm just showing you today. It's not really on the lecture schedule for today. I decided to show you. The major part here is what you'll be working on, section 11, which is the research plan. And you'll be filling out the data management, the analysis, chapter 15. So the major part of the data assignment will be figuring out in summarized format, what is the research plan? So where will the project be conducted? Like where, like a physical place. If it's not like really it's a physical place, because are you getting student records from UTech? It doesn't have to be that you're actually going to the place, but if it's Jamaica, wherever, it must be somewhere. Projects are not done the whole group. What is the research design? You must select one that is clear. And maybe at some point we need to go back through what our research designs, but it needs to be something that makes sense with the explanation. You need to have the research method. You select one of these. What are the participant groups? Remember, there could be one or more. So it could be that you're, let's take UTech, you could be doing staff and students. You know, that's two different participant groups, and you would say why for both of them. A lot of students just write and they don't say why. And then you say what you're going to do. And in the best case scenario, you would attach copies of letters. And then how much time the people are going to be given to participate. Typically, it should be at least a week. How many potential participants will be selected. And this is where you're going to be talking about the sampling method. Remember, we talked about probability and non-probability sampling. So you would need to say which type of non-probability or probability sampling. So for example, not to talk about it right now, remember I made a big deal that there's a big difference between convenient sampling and random sampling, and people just tend to mix them up. So you need to be careful what you're saying here and giving an explanation. And then how many participants will be recruited? You must actually explain why. If you want full marks, remember there are rules of thumb, but if you want to be really fancy, you can even use if it's a probability method for sampling, you can actually use what is called a calculator that can actually work it out based on the statistical technique you'll be using. What's required of the participants? You must say what they're going to do. Are they going to be interviewed? Are they going to fill out a online survey, etc.? It must be clear. How will you protect the privacy of the individuals who are participating in the project? That must be described. And then usually most of you don't have relevance experience. You're going to talk about how you're going to manage the data, you know, so that people can essentially get it without permission. So some kind of security mechanism. Then how you're going to analyze, that should be described succinctly, as in concisely. And then most of this is fairly simple, but a lot of people just don't fill it out and therefore can't get full marks. So this is just prep to what I'm going to talk about in the future. But basically, you're going to be saying, how will you actually review what's happening in the project? If something goes wrong, what will you do? Adverse events just means when something goes wrong, what will you do? Will you report it to your supervisor, to the medical center, to wherever, to the faculty office, something like that? If the project is terminated, by the way, projects are only terminated typically if there are adverse events and there are some clear ethical violation that people see. You know, it's not typically because of running out of money or time. And it's an ethical principle that participants, if they want their results, they should be able to get it. So you could say things like the results will be provided by email, or anybody who asks will be provided a printed copy of the results, whatever is appropriate to that particular thing. And then there's a place where the applicant signs, the supervisor signs, and that's it. So I wasn't doing this right now to do a complete teaching of it or anything. I'm just giving an overview. Anybody has any quick questions? So just giving a context of where we're going, just to recall for everybody. So basically we have, just to remind us all, we have for this class, we have a concept note, which you've all done. You have done a literature review matrix, which you should have either done or almost finished doing. You are either finished doing or almost finished doing a literature review. Then in the same vein, the last thing is to do an ethics application for that same project, right? So that is all together, all as a group project where everybody should be doing some part of that project for each of the projects, and it should be showing you truth that you're actually doing work, right? And then aside from that, you have lab assignments. And aside from that, you have a test. The test will be given in week 13, unless for some reason we push it back. That's the plan. So I'm going to come out of that. And any question? No questions? All we have is 25 people plus me. No questions so far. All right. I have a silent class. I guess everything I do is like I'm talking to myself. Anyway, there we go. So this is a fairly simple lecture today. The lecture I'm focusing at the moment is talking about communicating research outcomes. So all research projects, the goal of it is to try to answer research questions that have a purpose. And then if you don't disseminate that, what is the point? So in general, how do we communicate research? If you're doing bachelor's, master's, a taught master's, a MPhil, a PhD, they tend to have either thesis or they call them different titles, major project in our school, or different document names. But aside from what you give to the university, you can convert parts of those possibly into journal papers. And then there are different types, including empirical papers. So this class focuses on preparing you to do an empirical paper where you use usually primary data that you collect and analyze that data to answer the research question or questions. I mean, actually, you can also do an empirical paper using secondary data. And actually know that there are a couple of major project topics right now for next year, or no, for this year, that actually is focusing on secondary data. So it's certainly possible. And then there are also opinion or perspective papers. We're not teaching how to do that. That might be relevant for what you read. And then there are reviews. So remember, everybody, when you're doing a doing your literature review, it's always good to see if you can find any systematic reviews or meta-analysis. But we're not teaching how to do these two types. There are actually other types of journal papers, but we're focusing on teaching how to do empirical papers. And then, so in addition to publishing in peer-reviewed journal papers, there are also academic conferences. And in academic conferences, there are both posters and papers. So for example, I might have mentioned in the past, my major project last year, my major project 2 years before that, both of those studies got accepted for oral paper presentation. And then I had one 2 years ago that only got accepted for poster presentation. So the one this year, the students are actually going to present. 2 years ago, I actually presented on behalf of all of us. So a paper presentation is where, well, in fact, there's 3 types. So this is actually not complete. So in an academic conference, you can actually have the full paper. You can have an abstract, which is a oral presentation, and you can have a poster presentation. Right, so they're all different. But the point is, you can either have to create a poster, which I'm going to show you in the presentation today, or you actually create a paper either by just coming up with an abstract or actually writing the whole paper that comes in what's called the conference proceedings. So you should all be very familiar with this by now, although perhaps many of you have forgotten it, because I think I'm very familiar because I've been teaching this for a while now and supervising major projects. So the research report that we are using in SCID And most of you take.
Pardon me, Miss Mir. Are you
Yes?
sharing your screen?
Oh, you're not seeing? Oh, I thought I
No, Miss
was.
Mir.
Oh, dear. Oh, sorry. Screen. I thought I was sharing my screen. Oh, let me just go back to show you what I was not showing you from beginning, right? So I thought I meant to be. So what I was telling you is that in terms of communicating research, we have the thesis, the journal paper, the academic conferences. We're focusing in this class on empirical papers, right? So there are other things as well, which we're expecting you to read, but the focus is to be able to create empirical papers. For many of you, that empirical paper might lead to a conference presentation or a poster presentation. That poster presentation actually could be in like UTech Research Day, which they used to have every year, but since the pandemic, I don't know, seems as if, well, we didn't have it last year and wait, we didn't have it this year. So unless we're gonna have it again, right? So last year I was supposed to present at the UTech Research Conference and literally that day was March 12th. UTech closed classes on March 13th and they had classes on the 12th, but they closed research day. So, yes, I was already all dressed up to present and it then didn't happen. Anyway, but that is neither here nor there, so let's move on. So I had just talked about that and then I was saying the research report. So by now, everybody should have been introduced, whether you were a class or not, to what is in a research report. So in this class, we're focusing on chapters 1, 2, and 3. So you would what I call the concept paper becomes the introductory chapter of a research report. You would just, well, yeah. And the literature review is what you're either finishing or preparing to finish. And instead of asking you to write a method chapter at this moment, we're going to ask you to do the ethics application, which actually can actually come before or after you write the chapter 3. So instead of asking you to write the whole method chapter, we're just asking you to fill out the ethics form, which is basically a summary of what's in the method chapter. It's not a summary. It's a subset because in the methods chapter, you also have things like methodological limitations that's not currently in the ethics report. And what else is in there? So there are actually several things that sometimes the methods chapter would have things like budget, it would have a section on a number of things. So like a methods might also have, if you're going to do a prototype, you would describe the project as in terms of the prototype development. All that won't be in the ethics. So the methods chapter is typically longer than what's in the ethics. So it's really a easier assignment actually. And the reason why I change it is not only it's an easier assignment, that way people can't see they've never seen the ethics application. So what had happened is when people got a major project, they were like, what is this thing? So now you all going to be introduced as part of the assignment. So you'll be prepared for a major project. And in this class, we're not focusing on the analysis or the conclusion, although I shouldn't say that because what you do in the lab class is preparing you for the kind of analysis that you'll be doing in your major project to come. And then we all know, I hope, so let me just ask, the conclusion here is connected to what of these 5 chapters? What is the conclusion connected to? What in either chapter 1, 2, 3, 4 is a conclusion connected to? So let's start with chapter 1. Tell me what in chapter 1 is connected to the introductory chapter. Anybody? Don't all speak at once.
Could you please repeat that, Ms. Mir?
I said in the conclusion, as in the conclusion is basically what the researchers or researcher say is what they find. But how is the conclusion connected to chapter 1? Remember, chapter 1 is the same as our concept paper, meaning, remember, that has a background, a problem statement. Oh, say Andrew already asked the question. So I was going through all the things in the problem. Research question. So yes, Andrew is right. So can anybody explain what is the connection between the research questions and the conclusion?
Would it be that you reflect to see whether you were close to answering the research questions, or you
Close?
see, as in Ms. Mira, we know that we don't actually answer the research question, but it reflects on the research questions themselves, and it's, you know this?
No, I don't know.
So I can't explain it.
Where are you answering the research questions?
No, Ms. Mira said that we don't answer the research
What we
question.
do? Which chapter do we answer the research questions? Anybody? So let me say it a different way. So I've actually said it so many times. So we know that chapter 2 not supposed to answer the research questions. Because we said it many times, and I don't know if everybody understands why. And I'm happy to explain again in case you don't understand. But the goal of the project is to answer the research questions. So where do we answer those research questions or question? Oh my God, I have 20 something people here and nobody knows the answer. No, 25. This is scary. Hello,
It's
my
chapter 5.
students. Yes, I was going to be like, Kurt, that sounds like you.
Yes, it is.
Yes. So analysis, yeah, that's partly true. So what happens? You do the analysis in order to come to a conclusion. So the analysis is, let's say you had 3 research questions. You're going to after the methods tell you how you collect the data, whether it's primary or secondary data. The analysis are the steps you're going to do so that you can get to a conclusion. So technically, depending how you write up chapter 4, you will have like a big, broad overview, but really the answers come in chapter 5. But yes, so I would say the research questions basically get answered between chapters 4 and 5, but basically they're answers concisely in the conclusion. Everybody get this now? So by the way, is there anybody who doesn't understand why the literature review should never answer the research question? Because I know people came to this class very late and haven't been coming every class. So please show your hand if you don't understand why it is that the research questions are not answered in literature review. So I'm taking it everybody here understands? Oh, Rob says him to understand. So let me see. Let me go to I don't know. I'm not sure who I should pick on. Maybe I shouldn't pick on anybody. Can anybody volunteer as to why it might be the case that I'm saying in every case the literature review doesn't answer the research question? Just even one reason. It might help if you think about the definition of what I'm going to call academic research or scholarly research, because I want to put that as a if you went all the way back to week 1, remember in week 1 we were saying that we're not using the word research the same as how everybody uses research in everyday language. And everyday language you can do things like research where's the nearest restaurant that serves Chinese food. We're not doing that in this class. Jaden, I see you come in. The question on the board is, why is it that I have declared, like all scientists, that literature review does not answer the research questions? I'm waiting for any student to answer.
The question is why you're declaring that it shouldn't answer the research question?
Not it shouldn't. That if it does, there's a problem. Yes.
Oh. I have no idea really.
You have no idea.
The literature review, isn't that just
Yes.
analyzing the sources that you have?
Right, but okay, you're analyzing the sources that you have, and how does that tie to the research questions, and why is it not answering the research questions? The thing is, let's go back to the definition of research. We're saying that research are things that they're either solving problems that nobody knows the answer to, that's applied research, or they're actually stuff that's if something in the chat here, or research is, let me see, or research is basically adding knowledge to the world. So this says that Andrew says, if literature review can answer the research question, then it should not have been a research question. That's true, but it's not really a why. That's why, because let me say the why. It shouldn't have been a research question because academic research are things that we don't know the answers to. So Andrew is right, but he doesn't actually tell us why. Now, can you imagine? That's the goal here. So when we say we don't have the answers to, this could be that there's some, as you don't have definitive answers based on the literature. So there could be controversy in the literature. 3 papers say something, and another 3 say something. It doesn't tell you definitively. Everybody following where I'm going with this? Somebody give me a topic that you're researching. Quick. Nobody wants to give me a topic? Wow, the whole class over topic.
It's I guess smart farming. That was my topic.
What's your topic?
Smart farming.
Smart farming. What about smart farming exactly?
The digital literacy and smart farm and farmers in
digital literacy.
developing countries.
Okay, so if I can remember, you're trying to see, looking at the farmers in Clarendon, and you want to see if there's like a relationship between digital literacy and the utilization of maybe IoT or smart farming,
Right.
something like that. Right. So the thing about it, guys, there is limited literature. So apparently there's at least, based on what I remember from, being in my class, there's apparently some project that was done in the last, is it 2 years? Recently-ish, where they actually use smart farming in some places in Clarendon, because apparently Clarendon has a lot of farming in Jamaica. But there seems to be a paucity of research, meaning probably even none, like printed research on this area. But when you look in the literature, we can see that smart farming leads to potential gains of all kinds. It was also, you also see that in general, there are problems where people are either digital illiterate, and there also tends to be problems in rural. I'm just going for what I remember. But the thing about it, there are many things that are not known. So from reading literature, and I may be wrong here, we find out that the farmers that have poor digital literacy tend to not adopt smart farming, even though smart farming has the potential to improve the output, as in is output, no matter the harvest and a whole long list of things. Am I kind of right, Jada? You still there?
Yes, that's right.
Yes, something like that, guys. But the whole point is, if let's take one research question, I'm going to make up because I don't know what it is. If one research question is does the digital literacy of Jamaican farmers impact their the technology acceptance for smart farming? At the moment, the literature doesn't answer that. So it talks about that in a more general sense, but it doesn't go all the way down to Jamaican farm.
I think
You're not getting me, guys. I'm saying whatever the project is going to be, I'm not trying to get into I don't even care what your project is anymore. I just want to give a quick illustration to the class.
No, it wasn't about that. I was saying,
okay,
I
next topic
get
then.
the picture about the literature review.
Yes.
If your literature review answers the research question, then why are you doing that research? Like, there's no gap. Is that what it
right
is?
You could be doing it, but what you need to do then is you need to revise your research question to be something that is called a gap in the literature.
Right.
So it's no problem. You're doing, like, you might start off, and if you find out there's a lot of literature on what you want to research, you need to basically like wheel and come again, it's called pivoting, to figure out what is worth researching. Because if there's a lot of information on that topic, then what you can typically do, guys, which is what most students don't seem to understand, is there normally is a gap in any area. It's just not necessarily what you see initially. So when you start to read, you can almost 95% of the time find a gap. Anyway, all I was saying here is that we have these things. So introduction, literary review, methods, analysis, and conclusion. In the front matter, you have things like the table of content, table of figures, abstract or executive summary, and there's a back matter. This is what you're doing for major project. And so in a conference, this is not typically you present work in progress reports sometimes, and that's what the mini Viva is in major project, where you only present chapters 1 to 3. So for example, people who starting major project now, they're going to do a mini Viva in January to present basically essentially chapters 1 to 3. So for academic conferences, there's a whole lot of, there actually are papers on academic conferences, which I actually personally found interesting when I found it. But the point is, there's things about, should there be standardized guidance, how to make a poster. So if at any point you decide to be working on conferences, you can actually do some research to find out what is supposed to be effective conferences. So these are traditional posters in an academic conference where people stand up in front of their posters, and this is a summary of their research project. And usually it needs to have some graphics so people are not completely bored with all this text. So in general, they're effective visuals. So, and especially now that we're going into online presentations, you have to think about, like we're using Zoom or any other video conferencing tool, you want to think about where it's going to be cut off, and you need to have much more visuals than before. White space is very important. And then there are new methods to make better posters in less time. So this is one YouTube channel that I have. And so these are the traditional old school research presentations. And basically this would be the standard way. So it would be like, to make it easy for someone to follow, you can either use arrows to show, read this and this, so this is the title, read this, that, or you number them so people know what the order to read it. So it's very easy. And it would typically have things like introduction, methods, results, conclusion, and references. By the way, you don't typically have a literature review section. The introduction is because you don't have enough space to do a whole literature review on a poster. Right? And if it's what was I called, a work in progress, it would just have maybe introduction, methods, and maybe the prototype. It wouldn't have results, conclusions, or it could have preliminary results, possibly. So a work in progress, which people actually do present at conferences, don't have conclusions. They might have preliminary conclusions and preliminary results. It depends. So for a poster presentation, it's not just a research paper stuck on a board. It's supposed to be visually appealing, showing, not telling. Supposed to be a source of information, a conversation started with researcher in front of it, advertisement, and a summary of your work. And so there are many challenges that people make. The objectives are hard to find. The text tend to be too small. Graphics can be not well designed and poorly organized. So when you're doing a poster, you have to think about what's your message. By the way, we have poster presentations or poster, what do you call it? What I want to call it, poster competitions that we have most years. So you might want to think about joining a poster competition when you're doing your major project if you have interest. So what you want to think about is what's your main message, what room do you have? The organizers for any poster would tell you what the size, if it's in a face-to-face setting, they normally tell you whether it should be landscape or portrait, depending on the conference. And if it's going to be in the face-to-face, you need to think about how much money you have. Like in a UTech setting, pretty much for the competitions, we just normally do it online, and you present it graphically. But they've actually had posters where they actually printed the poster. So it has varied from year to year as to what it is. It does cost money to print a really good looking poster though. You need to ask yourself, is the main message obvious? You need to edit the text so it's as simple as possible to read. You must ask people for comments on draft, and this is where I just give it a passing comment. I have made few posters at least 3 or 4. The first one I ever made officially was for the Scientific Research Conference about 5 years ago. And I actually emailed them and asked them if they were going to have any competition. They told me no. Anyway, after I saw how much work it was, I was wondering if I should bother, but I decided to. And guys, can you believe that I went there? So I decided I did this. I asked a lot of comments, and I can never forget a particular co-worker in skit. I asked most of the skit people, some other people too. I remember asking an artist who worked at UTech, but I asked mostly co-workers in skit, including admin staff, so they're not experts in my area. One co-worker just told me it was horrible, and I was actually give me some specifics how it was horrible. Mostly she just seemed to be just negative. So trying to remember exactly. Oh, I know, she was my Facebook friend. So later when I won second place prize and I put it on Facebook, I don't even think I told my co-workers. And she like saw me and she said, "Oh, your poster got second place. How come?" I said, "I improved it since the last time you saw it." She didn't even tell me congratulations, She was just like, they're scowling at me. But the point is, how did that happen? Because she, for example, was giving me this critique. I just went to other people and kept asking for feedback. So that's the same as when you're doing writing, when you're doing visuals, you need to ask for feedback unless you're just super talented to know how to do it really good. And poster should be, the visual is at least 50% as important as what is written. So people should be able to get a gist of your work within 60 seconds. If they can't, something is wrong fundamentally with the poster. Because yes, they can look at the more details, but they should know what the research is about in less than 60 seconds. So the title should be clear and the overall objective, all that should be clear. So the next thing now, we just did a little short presentation on posters. Now we're going to move now to oral presentations, which also happens in conferences and all you will be doing for your major project and perhaps for other classes, obviously. So you want to think about who you're presenting to. What is the academic background of those people? What are their age and experience? Do they have expertise in that area? Because if you're talking to non-experts, you actually have to present differently. Or if you're talking to a mixed crowd, you actually have to think about that when you're making the presentation. You have to think about the language, not just when it's English, like how, like, is it 12th grade language or is it university master's education language? You actually need to think about, but no matter what, it must not be too boring. So you want to use graphics where possible. So a presentation not to impress people is to not tell them everything you know about the subject. It's not to present every detail of your work. It is to give people a sense of your work, make them want to read your paper. That's the idea, because if you've done research, in typical conferences, you have between 15 to 20 minutes, and that's not enough to give the whole project. So for example, in major project, we give you a whole half an hour, and many students don't work within the time because they don't work at it. To do 9 months of a project and then to present it in only half an hour, if you've done a great job, is actually a lot of work to get it down to half an hour. So you have 2 sets of students. You have ones who they finish in 15 minutes because they've done almost no work and so they have nothing to present. And they have other students who they did a great job, but because they go, like they're trying to go 40, 45 minutes, actually losing marks because they have not worked and they're getting it in the time that's required, which is half an hour for the final Viva. So you need to get feedback on your work. That's really the goal of academic presentations in general. So academic work is on the whole idea of peer review. So I will be the first, as your tutor and your other tutors, Dr. Thomas and Dr. Jarrett, we're giving you feedback on your work. If you go on to be in academia, or if you're even in a business setting, people are going to give you feedback. That is really what a presentation is for. It's not just a one-way street. So to do our presentation, you need to organize your talk, design the slideshow, and practice after you prepare your presentation. This is some joke about knowing your audience. You can read it at your own time, but this is already on the Moodle site. So you need to think about who is at your talk. Is it experts in your field, experts not in your field, students, non-experts? It all matters. Likely to be a mix, so think about having something for everybody. People might be tired, they can read, so you don't want to have everything on the screen. Many people are saying, why should I listen? Because if they're very tired or if you're boring, they stop listening really quick. In fact, let's just go to the point. People stop listening even when they're getting paid unless you know how to interest them. So what can you do? You want to try to give the significance of the research right at the beginning of your talk so people know why this is important. If possible, you want to say to results, you want to use visuals. You want to basically tell them that you know what the problem is, why it's important, why you have a solution, is it different or better than other people. You should by presenting as you know the literature. On that note, I've supervised so many projects, but I remember one of the worst ones. I cannot believe that a group, after I told them that they shouldn't go and present, and those days we had no rule that the supervisor could stop. The people went to present and they literally were stopped before they finished. They were stopped by the team because they decided not to present any literature. And I remember one panelist just asked the students, since I was their supervisor, did they ever meet with me? And when I saw this particular, it was a male panelist, when I saw this particular panelist later, he was asking me and I said, oh, that group didn't do any work and they thought they knew more than me. And I said, what was the problem? He said, they didn't even present any literature. I said, but they did have some. He said he didn't present it. And I said, oh, that's very interesting. The point is they knew better than me and everything. So they kept telling me what should be happening. And that is why I told them, please not to. That is why when you're doing an undergraduate major project, you need to listen to your supervisor. If it is that you have a supervisor incompetent by some chance, then you need to change the supervisor or you need to resign from being a UTech student, whichever one. Makes sense. Anyway, moving on. So you want to use examples in a presentation to motivate why your work makes sense, illustrate what you're trying to say, show solutions. If there are any extreme cases, you generally want to use examples, not just general cases, so people can understand what you're saying. So because you will get lost, actually, like I have never always used this, but this is going to come now. It's kind of cute. So you can have a running outline. So here's the one. So this could be the 5 topics. And as you're going along, you can see that we went from pre-processing up here, then we change slides and now we're on filtering, then we're on etc. So that's just a way of showing where we are in the presentation. You know, especially if the topic is not familiar to the people who are present or the audience, this is a good visual tool. All right, so in preparing for a presentation that is an academic presentation, you need to be familiar with related scholarly works. They typically have, especially for major project presentation, the panelists knowing about work that you don't know about it, and sometimes they even in the middle of the presentation decide to Google or Google Scholar because something doesn't add up. So then they start asking challenging questions. So it's all about you having read it widely enough in the field that the panel is not going to be like, but he didn't mention this, what about this concern and whatever that. But however, in your presentation, let's say your paper, let's say it's like Mini Viva. Mini Viva will be chapters 1 to 3 you're presenting. Maybe your literature review actually has 30 references. All of those 30 references won't be in your presentation. So even though you're going to present the literature review, maybe you would have only selected 15 of those or 10 of those in the actual presentation. Remember, the whole presentation for Mini Viva is only 15 minutes. So you're going to present chapter 1, chapter 2, and chapter 3. You don't have time in that 15-minute presentation to actually cite every single paper. You need to be selecting the ones that's most important. So you're going to talk about, if it is like the final thing, or you're going to have results, and you're going to be selecting the most important results, and you're only going to put the references. Maybe we're going to have citations in the middle of each slide that have references to real papers, should actually have the citation there using APA format, and the references are at the end of the talk as well as in the paper itself, as in the slideshow itself. You're going to acknowledge all the co-authors. And then you want to have some technical details, especially if you're presenting to skit staff, you should have as much technical details as possible. And what is typically advised is that you can have some extra slides at the back for people who ask specific questions. I can actually even think, for example, there are a few members of staff in the school who would want to know all about how you build a particular software prototype, and they're going to be ready. You need to be ready to answer the questions that are being asked. If people want to know more about your diagrams and your analysis, you should have access to that. So when they're asking the questions, you can bring it up. So if the panelists want to ask questions, you should be ready to answer it. And maybe some of the important meat is not in the 15-minute, but maybe have it as some additional slides. I think you think this might be asked, and you have it there ready in case it is asked. So it's a little bit of a bit of a thinking through. So that is why it's really good to get your supervisor or other people to practice, so they give you some feedback as to what should be in your presentation. And if you're going to academic conference, similarly, get other people to kind of give you feedback. As I said here, prepare backup slides to answer questions. They will be after any questions in case things that you think might be asked. So you want to have what's the problem, the motivation, state of the art, what is your key contribution to the field, what is your approach, if it is different, better, whatever you're going to say, you must always repeat what you have said at the end. In a presentation, less is more. Use animations sparingly. You want to have very few colors, certainly not more than 3. You want to be consistent through the entire thing with the formatting, including the color, font size, type, background, etc. You want to use the slides so that there's space, that people don't feel it like it's overcrowded. So like this one is way too overcrowded, and it's better to show one point at a time. This takes a little time to actually do, but this is a better way. So here we can concentrate on what you're saying. You can prevent people from reading ahead. So you can see, once you're actually awake, you're more focused on what I'm actually saying. So I actually did do it for the whole thing, but this is the better way. So you want to have a good font size. If it's under 18, that's way too small. It's better to be somewhere between 24 to 32, and the title font is about somewhere between 36 to 54. And you want to use standard fonts. There's some selected here. You don't want to use any crazy cursive fonts, which is hard to read. So here are some fonts that say 18 is the minimum. This one is too small. You don't want to use a serif font or a complicated font like that. You don't capitalize, except perhaps for the headings, because headings take longer to read. You want to make sure that the font color contrasts with the background. I remember actually back to presentation of my students, I remember seeing more than one set of students present, and you could not read what they were saying. Unbelievable. So you want to make sure you can read what you're saying. So like this, look at this yellow here, you can't even read it. This is just crazy. The colors down here like the rainbow, that's just not good. This second one here is distracting and annoying. So you want to make sure, maybe you don't love this particular presentation, so you can choose something else, but you just want it to be simple. So attractive was simple, the background's light, and it's consistent through the whole presentation. Like this is horrible, and there's noise which you don't want. You want any graph must be titled, more than just charts and words. You're going to need to explain what you see in the graph. So this needs a title. This has a title. This has a, what's this called again? A key telling me what these different colors mean. And this graph doesn't have titles. This thing is too small. The key is too small. So you want to think about, do you need grid lines here? These are distracting. You want to have the font being large enough, the colors going with each other, and as little colors as possible. Having a title, shading is generally also a good thing in a graph. So you want to practice the presentation in front of friends. Make sure that the slides are neither too little or too much. If you're using animations, you might want to limit that. And the key is to practice to different groups of people. Time your presentation. Assume technology would fail, so you need to have backups. As an example, I remember a bright student presenting at the Jamaica Community Society, and he had a prototype as part of his presentation, and it failed. And I said to him after, when he came out, I said, your kind of wheel and come wasn't so bad, but why didn't you just have it like screenshots on the slideshow? Oh, he didn't think of that. It's okay. This is just basic. In case your thing doesn't work, if you have Snapchat, you can still explain to people the general gist. Because if the thing is not working, you can't even explain the general gist because you don't have any pictures. So you need to think about what can work. I mean, sometimes in major project, people will also still want to see the thing working, and they might say they want to come back and have another presentation or tell you to tape it. But the point is, you should at least have a plan B. So you want to think about how you're going to show examples. You want to be as enthusiastic as possible. Clearly don't read from the screen. You want to make eye contact. If you can look at people who are nodding, speak directly for them, think about questions, and if there are nonsensical questions, you can ignore them, but basically most questions need to be answered where possible. If it's in a major project situation where people are asking hard questions, you actually sometimes will answer it, and sometimes you say, oh, that's a really good question. Can you give us a few minutes to think about it or something? So some students just get stuck because the question is hard. You want to point at the screen, at the computer. You don't want to read word for word from your PowerPoint. And you want to make sure that you have notes in case something goes wrong. So it's good to have some notepad that you can glance at. And you want to finish on time. So if you're given 15 minutes, don't go beyond 16 or 17 minutes max. Don't go to 30 minutes. That's going to be a problem. Going to even stop you way before you finish. There are many kinds of questions, some that you might actually ask for them first to clarify it. Sometimes you just need to make suggestions, but sometimes it actually takes some amount of discussion with the person asking the question. It really depends, but no matter what, it's not about showing who's better than who as part of it. So the most important thing when doing a presentation is to try to figure out what are the likely questions, and so you're ready for them. If somebody is talking a lot, unless they shouldn't be allowed to talk during the presentation. So whether it's for a major project or something else, you should ask them to please hold on to those questions until the end, and you do it very politely. And so to get better presentations, you practice and practice and practice, you observe other people, you borrow their presentation ideas, see which things don't make you either get you bored or just like something in the slide turns you off. See comments, and here are the references, and that's it for right now today.